The reception fell silent as the uninvited guests stood up during the toast. Ladies and gentlemen, the man you know as Jonathan Prescott disappeared 8 years ago, leaving behind devastated families and empty bank accounts. His real name is Daniel Mercer. The bride's champagne glass shattered against the floor as gasps erupted throughout the stunned crowd. What dark secrets will emerge when a man's carefully constructed identity crumbles on his wedding day? Like and subscribe for more captivating tales of deception and redemption. Share your own unexpected revelation stories in the comments below. Emily's eyes darted to her new husband, searching for denial, for outrage, for anything to contradict this stranger's words. Instead, she found only the hollow terror of a man whose darkest secret had just been exposed. This man stole millions from innocent people before vanishing, the stranger continued, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. And I have proof. What followed would tear apart not just a wedding day, but an entire life Emily had believed was built on love and truth. Michael Foster had not planned to ruin a wedding. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined himself standing in this opulent ballroom, destroying a bride's happiness on what should have been the most joyful day of her life. But 6 months ago, he hadn't known that Daniel Mercer was still alive. Michael straightened his tie as security approached him. The faces surrounding him were a blur of shock and outrage. Only two remained in focus. The bride's twisted in anguish, and Daniel's pale with the bloodless terror of a ghost confronted by its past. I'm sorry it had to be today, Michael said, addressing the bride directly, but he left me no choice. 3 years of searching had led to this moment. 3 years since he'd promised his sister Jennifer, before lowering her casket into the ground, that he would find the man responsible for taking everything from her. Jennifer had been one of dozens, a single mother who invested her life savings with Mercer Financial Group, enticed by promises of secure returns and a college fund for her son. When Daniel disappeared with over $12 million of his client's money, Jennifer had lost everything. 2 months later, Michael found her in her bathtub, wrists slashed, a note apologizing to her son for leaving him nothing. Michael had debated for weeks. After discovering Daniel's new identity, he'd followed Jonathan Prescott to his office at the investment firm where he'd ironically become a rising star. He'd watched him shop for groceries, jog in the park, and kiss his fiancée goodnight. He'd even sat 3 rows behind them at a charity gala where Jonathan had donated $10,000 to children's cancer research. That the engagement announcement in the local paper had forced his hand. He couldn't let Daniel build a new life on the ruins of so many others. He couldn't let another woman be deceived. I represent 23 families this man destroyed, Michael continued, pulling documents from his jacket as murmurs rippled through the reception hall. I have proof of his crimes, his identity theft, and his current financial holdings. A silver-haired man, the bride's father. Michael Guest stepped forward. Security, remove this man immediately. Check his left shoulder, Michael called out as 2 men gripped his arms. Daniel Mercer has a distinctive scar from a childhood accident, 3 inches long, shaped like a crescent moon. The bride's eyes locked onto her husband's shoulder, and Michael knew in that moment that she had seen the scar before, had perhaps traced it with her fingers, asked about it, and believed whatever story Daniel had told her. Call the police, Michael said quietly. They can verify everything. As they dragged him toward the exit, Michael caught one last glimpse of Daniel Mercer. For a split second, their eyes met, and Michael saw something unexpected. There not hatred or rage, but a profound, resigned sadness. It was the look of a man who had always known this day would come. Emily Prescott, no, not Prescott, she realized, with a wave of nausea. She didn't even know her husband's real name. Everyone please remain calm, her father was saying, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. But Emily wasn't listening. Her eyes remained fixed on Jonathan's face, searching for denial, for outrage, for anything that would tell her this was all some cruel joke. Instead, she found resignation. Emily, he whispered, reaching for her hand. She recoiled as if burned. Don't touch me. 2 years of memories flashed through her mind in rapid succession. Their first meeting at the museum fundraiser where he'd charmed her with his knowledge of Renaissance art. Their third date when he'd cooked her a flawless coq au vin in his immaculate apartment. The weekend trip to the mountains where he'd proposed under a canopy of stars. Had any of it been real? We need to talk privately, he said, his voice low and urgent. Mrs. Lancaster, the wedding planner, appeared at Emily's elbow. Should we ask? The guests too, get everyone out. Emily interrupted, her voice hollow. Tell them, tell them whatever you need to. Her mother appeared, wrapping a protective arm around Emily's shoulders. Darling, let's go to the bridal suite. You're in shock. I'm not going anywhere with him, Emily said, eyes still locked on the stranger she'd just married. Just us. Then, her mother soothed. Your father will handle this. Emily allowed herself to be guided from the reception hall, feeling oddly detached from her body, as if watching the scene unfold from somewhere near the crystal chandelier. She caught fragments of conversations as they passed. Stunned guests called the police. Complete fraud, poor Emily in the bridal suite. Emily sank onto a velvet settee, her elaborate gown pooling around her like spilled milk. Her mother poured her a glass of water, but Emily couldn't bring herself to drink. "He's not Jonathan," she said, the words strange on her tongue. "We don't know anything yet," her mother said firmly. "That man could be delusional. Let's wait for the authorities." But Emily knew. She'd seen the truth written on her husband's face. 2 years of falling in love with a ghost. A knock at the door made them both jump. Emily's father entered, his face grim. "The police are here," he said. "And Emily, they've confirmed the man's claims fingerprint records match. He's not Jonathan Prescott." "Who is he?" Emily asked, her voice small. "His name is Daniel Mercer. He ran an investment scam in Boston. Disappeared 8 years ago after stealing millions from his clients." "And the real Jonathan Prescott?" Her father hesitated. "Died in a boating accident shortly after Mercer disappeared. They were similar in appearance. The police believe Mercer assumed his identity." Emily nodded slowly, something cold and hard forming in her chest where her heart should be. "I want to see him." Daniel sat alone. In an empty dining room, a police officer standing guard by the door. His hands were trembling as he adjusted his bow tie, a nervous habit that Jonathan Prescott had never had. But Daniel Mercer couldn't shake that. 8 years of meticulous reinvention, undone in 8 seconds. He had always known this moment might come. In the early days of becoming Jonathan, he'd jumped at every police siren, studied every stranger's face for signs of recognition. But as the years passed, as Jonathan's identity fit more comfortably, like a borrowed suit tailored to his frame, he'd allowed himself to believe in the possibility of escape. Then he'd met Emily, and for the first time, he'd wanted the lie too. Be true. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering the day everything had changed. He'd been sailing off the coast of Maine, $3 million in offshore accounts, another $9 million in bearer bonds, and a new identity waiting for him in Canada. A summer storm had appeared without warning. Another boat had capsized. Daniel had managed to pull the man aboard, but he was already a stranger with no identification except a waterlogged wallet containing a driver's license. Jonathan Prescott, 36, Boston. The resemblance had been striking. Same height, similar features, close enough in age. A gift from whatever God watched over criminals. He'd made a choice in that moment that altered everything. He reported his own boat lost at sea. Jonathan Prescott, the sole survivor. The real Daniel Mercer had vanished beneath the waves. The new Jonathan Prescott moved to Chicago, invested a small portion of the stolen funds in legitimate businesses, built a respectable life. Carefully constructed backstory, impeccable manners, conservative investments. Nothing to draw attention. He became everything the real Jonathan had never been. Stable, successful, trusted. Then came Emily, with her quick laugh and serious eyes. Emily, who challenged him, who saw goodness in him that he'd forgotten existed. Emily, who made him wish he truly were Jonathan Prescott. For her, he'd pulled back from his remaining criminal enterprises. For her, he'd actually begun helping people with their investments rather than exploiting them. For her, he'd anonymously returned money to 2 of his former victims, telling himself it was the beginning of making amends. The door opened, and Emily entered. Her wedding dress seemed too bright in the sterile room, like a swan that had wandered into a morgue. Her father and a police detective flanked her. "Leave us," she said to them, her voice steady despite the mascara tracks on her cheeks. "Emily, I don't think," her father began. 5 minutes, she insisted. "You can watch through the window." Reluctantly, they stepped outside. Daniel stood, his legs unsteady. "Emily, is your name really Daniel Mercer?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes." "Did you steal millions of dollars from innocent people?" Another nod. "Yes." "Did you? Her voice caught. "Did you ever love me at all?" Daniel looked into her eyes. The only truth he had left to offer her. "That's the only thing about me that wasn't a lie." The police had commandeered the hotel's business center, transforming it into an impromptu investigation room. Detective Rivera spread documents across the conference table as Emily, her parents, and the wedding party's best man watched in stunned silence. "Mr. Foster has been tracking Daniel Mercer for years," Rivera explained, gesturing to Michael, who stood awkwardly by the door. "He's compiled substantial evidence." Michael stepped forward, his expression apologetic as he addressed Emily. "Tried to find a better way to tell you. I called your office twice last week, but I couldn't get past the receptionist." Emily said nothing, her eyes fixed on the papers before her. News articles about a massive investment fraud. Photos of a younger Daniel with different hair, standing proudly before Mercer Financial Group. Court documents detailing charges, never prosecuted because the defendant had disappeared. And most damning of all, city by side, DRIVERs. License photos of Daniel Mercer and Jonathan Prescott, showing 2 different men who could have passed 4 brothers. "The fingerprints confirm it," Detective Rivera said. "Your husband is Daniel Mercer. The real Jonathan Prescott died in a boating accident 8 years ago. His body was recovered 3 days after the incident." Emily's mother gasped, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. "We've already executed a search warrant on your home in Mr. Mercer's office," Rivera continued. "His current finances are being frozen pending investigation." "Oh God," Emily whispered. "Honeymoon tickets, the new house, ... I'm afraid those assets are now part of the investigation." Rivera said gently. James Wilson, Jonathan's best man, and colleague at the investment firm, shook his head in disbelief. I've worked with him for 5 years. I vetted him myself when he joined the firm. His references checked out. His background was impeccable. That's what he does, Michael said, quietly. He creates perfect paper trails. He becomes whoever he needs to be. Emily looked up suddenly. The charity work, the donations to children's hospitals. Michael hesitated. We believe some of that was legitimate. He's been leading a double life, in more ways than one. The past 3 years, he appears to have been operating mostly within the law. Mostly, Emily repeated bitterly. Outside the room, raised voices caught their attention. Through the glass partition, they could see Daniel being led away in handcuffs, his wedding tuxedo incongruous with the metal restraints. 2 uniformed officers guided him toward the service elevator, away from the remaining wedding guests. Emily, he called out, twisting against the officer's grip. Emily, please. Emily stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, it seemed she might respond, might run to him. Instead, she turned her back, shoulders rigid. I need his real history, she said to Detective Rivera. Everything. Where he grew up, his education, his family. I need to know who I really married. Rivera nodded sympathetically. We'll provide whatever information we can. But Ms. Lancaster, you should know that you're also a potential witness in this case. Your knowledge of his current activities, accounts, and associates could be valuable to the prosecution. Emily's father stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. My daughter is a victim here. Detective? She'll cooperate fully, but she needs time. Of course, Rivera agreed. For now, we'd like her to avoid contact with the suspect. That won't be a problem, Emily said, her voice hollow. I have no desire to see him again. But even as she spoke, her eyes drifted to the elevator where Daniel stranger Conman husband was disappearing from view. 3 days after what the local newspaper had dubbed the wedding day fraud, Emily sat in her parents' living room, across from Michael Foster and 3 strangers whose lives had been shattered by the man she'd married. This is Margaret Wilson, Michael said, gesturing to an elderly woman whose silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. And her husband, Thomas? Margaret nodded stiffly. We invested our entire retirement fund with Mr. Mercer. 47 years of savings. Gone. Thomas, a frail man with gnarled hands, stared at his shoes. Had to sell our home. Live with our daughter now. Emily swallowed hard. I'm so sorry. Not your fault, dear, Margaret said, though her eyes held something harder than forgiveness. And this is Cecilia Morales, Michael continued. The young Latina woman clutched her purse like a shield. Single mom, 3 kids. He promised their college funds would triple. Said he had a special investment opportunity just for people he believed in. Her laugh was brittle. My oldest had to drop out of community college. Works at a warehouse? Now. Emily nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. My sister Jennifer isn't here, Michael said quietly. She took her own life after losing everything to Daniel. Her son, my nephew, lives with me now. The weight of their losses pressed down on Emily until she could hardly breathe. These were just 3 of 23 families Michael had mentioned. 23 lives derailed by the charming man who had whispered promises of forever to her beneath a canopy of stars. Why did you want to meet them? Michael asked gently. Emily straightened her shoulders. Because I needed to see the real consequences of what he did. And because I want to help if I can. Help how? Cecilia asked, skepticism evident in her voice. I don't know yet, Emily admitted, but I have access to accounts, information. Maybe there's money hidden somewhere. Maybe I can make things right. Somehow, Thomas Wilson snorted. That money's long gone. Men like him don't save, they spend on fancy watches and fast cars. Emily frowned. But that's just it, Jonathan Daniel. He wasn't flashy. He drove a sensible car. Lived in a nice but modest condo before we bought the house. His clothes were expensive but conservative. He wasn't showing off wealth. Michael leaned forward. That's why he was so successful this time around. He learned from his mistakes. The real Daniel Mercer loved luxury. This new version was careful, calculated. Which means, Emily said slowly, he might have actually saved the money. A tentative hope flickered across the victims' faces. Even if you found it, Margaret said, it would go to the government first. Legal fees, court costs. Maybe, Emily conceded. But I have to try. After they left, Emily remained on the sofa, staring at the photos Michael had given her, the victims' faces blurred before her eyes. Retirement dreams destroyed. Education opportunities vanished. A young mother driven to suicide. And for what? So Daniel Mercer could reinvent himself, so he could seduce her with his false identity and manufactured past. The rage she'd been suppressing for days finally surged through her veins. She would find his money. She would make him pay not just to the courts, but to the people whose lives he'd destroyed. And then she would erase him from her life as thoroughly as he had erased his own past. Daniel sat on the hard bench in the holding cell, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, now rumpled and stained. The bow tie hung limply around his neck, like a dead thing. His left cufflink was missing, lost in the struggle when he'd tried to see Emily one last time before they took him away. The irony wasn't lost on him. 8 years of freedom ended on the day he'd willingly bound himself to another person for life. Mercer, the guard called. Your lawyer's here. Daniel followed the guard to a small conference room where a harried-looking public defender waited with a stack of papers. Mr. Mercer, I'm David Cohen. I've been assigned to your case. Daniel nodded, taking a seat. How bad is it? Cohen didn't sugarcoat it. Multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, money laundering, evading prosecution. They're still compiling charges. You're looking at 15 to 20 years, minimum. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Can I get bail? With your history of disappearing? Extremely unlikely. I need to talk to my wife. Cohen raised an eyebrow. Ex-wife technically, the marriage is invalid since you used a false identity, and she's a potential witness against you. Contact would be inadvisable. Please, Daniel said, leaning forward. 5 minutes. I need to explain. Explain what? That you're a career con artist who stole millions from vulnerable people, that you've been living under a dead man's name. Cohen shook his head. Focus on your defense, Mr. Mercer. The prosecution has an airtight case. As Cohen outlined possible defense strategies, Daniel's mind drifted to Emily, her face when Michael Foster had revealed the truth, the way she'd recoiled from his touch, the coldness in her eyes when she'd asked if he had ever truly loved her, the one truth in his web of lies. Mr. Mercer, are you listening? Daniel refocused. Yes, sorry. As I was saying, your best option is probably a plea deal. If you can provide information about the location of the stolen funds, I want to see Emily first. Cohen sighed. That's not how this works. You don't have bargaining power here. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the small window in the door, Daniel could see Emily arguing with a guard. His heart leaped. That's her, he said, half-dash rising. Cohen moved to the door. Let me see what's happening. He returned moments later. She wants to see you. 5 minutes. Supervised. Daniel nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair, suddenly painfully aware of his appearance. When Emily entered, he barely recognized her. The radiant bride was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-faced stranger in jeans and an oversized sweater. Emily, he began. Stop, she said, holding up a hand. I'm not here for explanations or apologies. I just need to know one thing. Daniel waited, hardly breathing. The money you stole? Where is it? Not what he'd expected. Not why did you lie or did you ever love me? Some of it's gone, he admitted. Living expenses. The wedding, our house, and the rest. He hesitated. The money was his only leverage, his only hope for a reduced sentence. Emily, I can't just people killed themselves. Daniel, children lost their futures. Elderly couples lost their homes. Her voice trembled with fury. You owe them. I know, he whispered. I've been trying to make it right. The anonymous donations, spare change compared to what you took. The guard rapped on the window. Time's up. Emily turned to leave. Wait, Daniel called desperately. I do love you, Emily. That wasn't a lie. She paused at the door, not turning around. Love requires truth, Daniel. Everything between us was built on lies. Then she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of her perfume, the same perfume she'd worn on their wedding day, just hours. I go in another lifetime. The doorbell rang for the 5th time that morning. Emily pulled the curtain back slightly, glimpsing another news van parked across the street from her parents' suburban home. A woman with a microphone stood on the porch, manicured finger hovering over the bell again. Emily let the curtain fall, and turned away. Her phone buzzed with another notification, another message from a journalist requesting an interview. No doubt, she'd stopped checking 2 days ago. You should eat something, her mother said, appearing in the doorway with a plate of toast. You've barely touched food since ... since her wedding day, since her life imploded, since she discovered she'd fallen in love with a ghost. I'm not hungry, Emily murmured, but took the plate anyway to ease her mother's worried frown. The headlines had been relentless. Wedding crasher exposes groom's criminal past. Bride discovers husband is notorious conman. Identity thief found. After 8 years at his own wedding, her phone rang. Sophia, her best friend, and maid of honor. The only call worth answering. Hey, Emily said, her voice thin. I'm outside, Sophia replied. Your mom said you needed rescue. 20 minutes later, they sat in a booth at the back of a quiet diner 30 miles from the media circus. Emily stirred her untouched coffee, while Sophia watched her with concerned eyes. Have you been to the condo? Sophia asked. Emily shook her head. After the honeymoon was cancelled and Daniel arrested, she'd retreated to her parents' home, leaving everything behind. The thought of entering the space she'd shared with him, with the stranger she'd believed was Jonathan, made her physically ill. The police are done with it, Sophia said gently. Detective Rivera called yesterday. You can collect your things, whenever you're ready. What things? Emily said bitterly. The life I thought I was building, the photos of us together, the wedding gifts we received under false pretenses. Sophia reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Your clothes, your books, your grandmother's china, the things that are yours, the things that were true before him. Emily blinked back tears. I don't even know what's real anymore. Sophie, 2 years of my life, wasted. Not wasted, Sophia corrected firmly. You didn't know. No one knew. James worked with him for 5 years, Emily said, referring to the best man who'd also been Daniel's colleague. The background checks, the references, all fake. How did no one catch it? Because he was good at what he did, Sophia said simply. And because the real Jonathan Prescott didn't have family looking for him, no one to notice he'd been replaced. Emily shuddered. He slept beside me every night. He knew everything about me and I knew nothing real about him. That's why you need to go to the condo, Sophia urged. Take back your things. Take back your power. Don't let him keep anything else from you. That afternoon, Emily stood before the sleek high-rise, where she'd lived with Daniel for the past year. The doorman's eyes widened in recognition as she approached, but he quickly composed his features. Miss Lancaster, he said formally, good to see you. Inside the condo, everything looked exactly as they'd left it the morning of the wedding. Emily's makeup scattered on the bathroom counter, Daniel's tie draped over a chair, the congratulatory banner Sophia had hung across the living room. Methodically, Emily began separating her belongings from his, her clothes from the closet, her books from the shelves, her toiletries from the bathroom dot in his nightstand drawer. She found a small black notebook she'd never seen before. She flipped it open, finding strings of numbers and letters, account numbers, passwords. She slipped it into her bag without a second thought, as she packed the last of her things. Emily paused before the large framed photo of them on the wall, laughing on a beach in Mexico. His arms around her waist, her head thrown back in joy. Left it hanging there, a monument to a love that never existed. Prison was exactly as Daniel had imagined during those early years on the run, when the fear of capture had still been fresh. Bleak cinder block walls, the constant cacophony of metal doors, shouted commands, and muffled conversations, the pervasive smell of industrial disinfectant failing to mask more human odors. What he hadn't anticipated was the crushing monotony. Each day identical to the last, the same schedule, the same faces, the same tasteless food. For a man who had spent 8 years reinventing himself, crafting a new identity with meticulous care, the rigid sameness was its own kind of torture. Mercer, the guard called. Male. Daniel looked up from his bunk, surprised. It had been 3 weeks since his arrest. 3 weeks of arraignments, meetings with his overworked public defender, and processing into the county jail to await trial. No one had written to him. The guard handed him a plain envelope. No return address? But the handwriting, neat, precise, was unmistakable. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded around a newspaper clipping. The headline screamed, "Wedding Fraudsters. Victims Speak Out." No note, no message, just the article detailing the stories of those he'd hurt, complete with photos of elderly couples forced from their homes, parents working multiple jobs to replace lost college funds, and a solemn Michael Foster standing beside a framed photo of his deceased sister. Daniel's chest tightened. Emily's message was clear. This is who you are. This is what you did. He carefully folded the article and slipped it under his thin mattress. That night, he wrote his first letter to Emily. He wrote about growing up poor in South Boston, watching his father gamble away rent money, and his mother work double shifts to keep them housed. He wrote about his first con at 15, selling fake concert tickets. How easy it had been. How quickly he'd progressed to bigger schemes. He wrote about the rush of the game, the addictive thrill of becoming someone new. He wrote about his genuine surprise at falling in love with her, how she'd made him want to be better than he was. He wrote about remorse, about the faces that haunted his dreams, about how, in the months before meeting her, he'd begun anonymously returning money to his victims, small amounts at first, then larger sums. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't deserve it. He asked only that she believe that his love, at least, had been real. Daniel mailed the letter the next morning. 3 days later, it was returned unopened. He tried again. Another letter, another returned. His attorney visited weekly, each time with worse news. The prosecution had a solid case. More victims had come forward. His offshore accounts had been located, some of them. At least, not enough money remained to make his victims whole. What about a plea deal? Daniel asked. They're offering 20 years, the attorney said. Minimum security, possibility of parole after 12, with good behavior. 20 years. He would be 61 when released. His youth, his future gone? Is there anything I can do to reduce it? Return all the money, every penny. And even then, we're probably looking at 15 years, minimum. Daniel nodded slowly. I need to think about it. Alone in his cell that night, he made a decision. Not for himself, but for Emily. For the victims whose lives he'd destroyed. One honest act to balance a lifetime of deceit. He requested paper and a pen. This time, he addressed his letter not to Emily, but to Michael Foster. I know where the rest of the money is, he wrote. All of it. I'll tell you on one condition, that it goes directly to the victims, not to the courts, not to legal fees. They deserve to be made whole. He hesitated, pen hovering over the paper, then added, and tell Emily, I'm sorry, not for getting caught, but for lying to her. That's the only truth I have left to offer. He sealed the envelope and gave it to the guard, wondering if this letter, too, would return unopened. Emily spread the contents of Daniel's black notebook across her kitchen table, Pages of cryptic notations, strings of numbers, location names, and dates. Some entries were highlighted, others crossed out. None made immediate sense. The doorbell rang. Emily gathered the papers quickly, sliding them into a folder before answering. Michael? Foster stood on her doorstep, looking uncomfortable in a wrinkled suit. "Thank you for coming," Emily said, stepping aside to let him in. "Your message said it was important." Michael followed her to the kitchen. "Something about Daniel's accounts." Emily opened the folder. "I found this in his nightstand. I think it might be a record of where he hid the money." Michael scanned the pages, brow furrowed. These could be account numbers, routing codes. Some look like GPS coordinates. He looked up sharply. "You haven't shown these to the police?" Emily shook her head. "Not yet. I wanted to understand what I was looking at first." She hesitated. "And I wanted to make sure the victims get compensated before the government takes everything for fines and court costs." Michael studied her carefully. "Why are you doing this? Most women in your position would just walk away." "Because I need answers," Emily said simply, "and because I need to make something right out of this whole mess." For the next hour, they pored over the notebook. Michael recognized some account numbers that matched known offshore holdings already frozen by authorities, but others were new. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to a recurring notation, JPR 86. "Jonathan Prescott?" Michael murmured. "But what's R86? Emily's eyes widened. "His boat." "The real Jonathan Prescott died in a boating accident. His boat was called Runner 86. I saw it in the police reports." "You think he hid something on the boat? Or used the boat's name as a password or account designation?" Emily grabbed her laptop. "The accident happened near Portland, Maine. Let's check banks there." 3 hours and dozens of phone calls later, they had leads on 6 previously undiscovered accounts in Maine, Cayman Islands, and Switzerland, all registered under variations of J. Prescott or shell companies with nautical names. "This could be millions," Michael said, voice tight with excitement. "Enough to help most of the victims recover at least part of their losses." Emily nodded, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and grief. "There's something else I need to know," she said. "About the real Jonathan Prescott." Michael hesitated. "What about him?" "Everything. Who he really was. The man whose identity Daniel stole." Emily met Michael's eyes. "I need to understand who I thought I married." The following day, they sat in a small cafe in downtown Chicago, away from the reporters who still occasionally staked out Emily's condo. "Jonathan Prescott was 36 when he died," Michael explained, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Only child of wealthy parents who died in a car accident when he was 28. Trust fund kid, never worked a day in his life. Liked sailing, gambling, and women not necessarily in that order." Emily opened the folder, staring at a photo of a man who looked remarkably like Daniel, same height, similar features, though the real Jonathan had a harder edge to his smile, a coldness in his eyes that Daniel had never shown. "He was nothing like the Jonathan I knew," she murmured. "That's because your Jonathan was Daniel's idealized version," Michael said. "He created a better man than the original." Emily flipped through more documents, the real Jonathan's college transcripts. Mediocre, bank records, extravagant spending, and newspaper clippings, mostly society pages, and 1 DUI. "No one looked for him?" she asked. "No close family. Few real friends." His death was officially confirmed. Dental records matched remains found after the accident. No one had any reason to suspect identity theft. Emily closed the folder, suddenly exhausted. "So Daniel became a better version of a dead man, while destroying dozens of lives in the process. Including yours," Michael said quietly. Emily stared out the window. "I'm not destroyed," she said finally, "just ... recalculating." The morning talk show host leaned forward with practiced concern. "So, Emily, you had no idea the man you were marrying wasn't who he claimed to be?" Emily maintained her composed expression, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her media training from years in corporate PR was finally proving useful. "No, Nancy, Daniel Mercer's deception was complete. He had created an entirely new identity, and on your wedding day," the host prompted. "I'd prefer not to discuss the details of that day," Emily interrupted politely but firmly. "I'm here to talk about the victim compensation fund we're establishing." The host looked momentarily flustered before recovering. "Of course. Tell us about this initiative," as Emily explained the fund's purpose. The camera panned dramatically to a monitor showing Daniel's mugshot alongside photos of Emily in her wedding dress, creating the visual juxtaposition the producers had been salivating for. This was Emily's 3rd interview this week. Each one had been necessary to publicize the compensation fund, but each felt like another public dissection of her private pain. After the studio lights dimmed and the microphones were off, Emily checked her phone. 17 new messages. Most from journalists seeking exclusive comments. 2 from her therapist checking in. 1 from Michael with updates on the fund, and 1 from an unfamiliar number that simply read, "He writes to you every day. Why won't you read his letters?" Emily's hands trembled slightly as she deleted it. Outside the studio, a small crowd of reporters waited. She slipped out the back entrance where Sophia waited in her car. How bad was it? Sophia asked as Emily buckled her seatbelt. The usual. How does it feel to be deceived? Did you ever suspect? Will you ever trust again? Emily's voice dripped with sarcasm. At least they mentioned the fund. Sophia navigated through downtown traffic. The crowdfunding site hit 2 million this morning. People are really responding to your story. My humiliation, you mean? Emily said dryly. Your resilience, Sophia corrected. Not many people would turn this kind of personal tragedy into something positive. Emily stared out the window. 2 months had passed since her wedding day. The media frenzy showed no signs of abating. The story had everything: romance, deception, a dramatic revelation, a photogenic victim. True crime podcasts were having a field day. A Lifetime movie was reportedly in development. Meanwhile, Daniel awaited trial in county jail. His court date repeatedly delayed as prosecutors built their case. Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a social media post. Against her better judgment, she clicked the link. It was a photo from her wedding, zoomed in on her radiant face as she gazed at Daniel during their vows. The caption read, either the worst actress ever or the most gullible bride in history. #WeddingCrashCon, #LoveIsBlind. Hundreds of comments followed, debating which was true. Some suggested she must have known, must have been complicit. Others pitied her naivety. Strangers dissecting her love life, her judgment, her intelligence. Don't read that garbage, Sophia said, glancing over. It's toxic. They think I'm either a fool or a liar, Emily said quietly. They think they know you from headlines, Sophia replied. They don't. At home, Emily found 3 more letters from Daniel waiting in her mail pile. Like the others, she set them aside unopened in a growing stack on her bookshelf. 37 letters now. 37 attempts at explanation, justification, perhaps even apology. She wasn't ready for his words. Not yet. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. Another interview request, this one offering a 5-figure sum for an exclusive. Emily closed the laptop and poured herself a glass of wine. The media wanted a victim or a villain. They couldn't understand that she was neither, just a woman rebuilding her life, one painful piece at a time. Her phone buzzed again. Michael, we found another account, he said without preamble. Zurich, almost 4 million. Emily took a deep breath. Let's bring them home. The visiting room at the county jail was smaller than Emily had imagined, with dingy beige walls and uncomfortable plastic chairs bolted to the floor. A guard stood by the door, face impassive as he monitored the handful of inmates and their visitors. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited. 3 months had passed since her wedding day. 3 months of unanswered letters piling up on her bookshelf. 3 months of questions festering in her mind. The door buzzed, and Daniel entered in an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones more pronounced, dark circles shadowing his eyes. His hair, once meticulously styled, was cropped short. He froze when he saw her, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too suddenly. Emily, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. Sit down, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He obeyed, hands folded on the table. Between them, his eyes never left her face, drinking her in like a man dying of thirst. You came, he said finally. I didn't think you would. I almost didn't. My letters, I haven't read them, she interrupted. Not one. Pain flickered across his face. Then why are you here? Emily took a deep breath. Because I need to understand. Not for you, but for me. I need to know if anything was real. Daniel leaned forward, eyes intense. My love for you is real. Is real. The only honest thing in my life. How can I possibly believe that? Emily asked, anger rising. You lied about everything. Your name, your past. Who you were, not who I was with you, he insisted. The man you fell in love with, that was me, Emily. The real me, just with a different name. Emily shook her head. You stole from people, destroyed lives. A woman killed herself because of you. Daniel's eyes closed briefly, grief etching deep lines around his mouth. I know. There's nothing I can say to make that right. Then why should I believe anything you say now? Because I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said quietly. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to believe that loving you changed me, made me want to be the man you thought I was. Emily studied his face she'd kissed 1,000 times. The face she'd believed she knew better than her own. When did it start? The stealing. I was 15, he said. My father was a drunk. My mother worked 3 jobs. We were always one missed paycheck from homelessness. I started small fake concert tickets, counterfeit merchandise. By 20, I was running credit card scams. By 30, investment fraud. And you never felt guilty. All those people? I told myself they were greedy, Daniel admitted. That they deserved it for wanting easy money. I was good at compartmentalizing, good at becoming someone else, until me. He nodded slowly. Until you. You saw something good in me, something worth loving. It made me want to be that person. You could have told me the truth, Emily said, voice breaking. Before the wedding, before I pledged my life to a stranger, I was afraid, he confessed. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of going to prison, and then it was too late. They sat in silence. the weight of his deception hanging between them. I found your accounts, Emily said finally. The ones in Maine and Switzerland, the Cayman Islands. Daniel's eyes widened. How? Your notebook. Michael Foster helped me decipher it. A mirthless laugh escaped him. Of course he did. We're using the money to repay your victims, Emily continued. Setting up a compensation fund. Daniel nodded slowly. Good. That's good. He hesitated. I was going to tell Foster where it was. I wrote to him. Why would you do that? Because it was time to make amends, he said simply. Because I couldn't give you back what I took from you, but I could at least try to help the others. Emily searched his face for deception, but found only resignation and regret. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. Daniel reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. Believe that I loved you. That wasn't a con, Emily. That was the truest thing in my life. The guard announced that visiting time was ending. As Emily stood to leave, Daniel asked, Will you come back? She paused, one hand on her purse. I don't. No, it wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even understanding. But it wasn't goodbye either. The law offices of Brennan and Walsh occupied the 32nd floor of a sleek downtown skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Chicago, the lake stretching blue and endless to the east. Emily sat at the conference table between Michael and her own attorney, Catherine Walsh, facing the federal prosecutor and 2 FBI financial crimes specialists. Let me make sure I understand, said Prosecutor Reynolds, removing his glasses to polish them. You've independently located approximately $11 million in hidden accounts belonging to Daniel Mercer. That's correct, Catherine replied. My client has provided documentation for all accounts listed in the brief before you. Reynolds glanced at the FBI agents. And you verified these accounts exist. We have, confirmed Agent Talbot. We've already frozen the Swiss and Cayman accounts. The main accounts were liquidated 2 weeks ago, but we've traced the transfers. To my client's foundation, Catherine interjected smoothly, the Mercer Victim Compensation Fund, a legitimate 501c already making distributions to verified victims. Reynolds leaned back, expression skeptical. Ms. Lancaster, while your initiative is admirable, these funds are evidence in an ongoing federal investigation. You had no legal right to access or transfer them. Emily met his gaze steadily. With respect, Mr. Reynolds, I didn't access the accounts. I simply located them and provided the information to proper authorities. After transferring nearly $3 million, those specific funds were in accounts under my name, as well as Daniel's. Emily clarified. Joint accounts established during our relationship, your fraudulent marriage, Reynolds corrected. A marriage I entered into in good faith, Emily countered, her voice sharp. Catherine placed a warning hand on Emily's arm. My client's legal team consulted with financial crime specialists before any transfers were made. We have documentation proving she acted within legal boundaries. Reynolds sighed, shuffling papers. The fact remains that your vigilante approach has complicated our case against Mercer. On the contrary, Michael interjected, speaking for the first time, Ms. Lancaster's efforts have identified funds that your investigation missed, funds that are now being returned to victims who have waited 8 years for justice. Agent Talbot nodded. He's not wrong. We hadn't located the main accounts. Reynolds drummed his fingers on the table. What exactly are you proposing here? Catherine slid a document across the table. A cooperative agreement. The victims receive immediate compensation through the fund. Your office gets full credit for recovery of assets, plus Ms. Lancaster's complete cooperation in your case against Mr. Mercer. And in exchange, no charges against my client for her role in distributing the recovered funds. And the foundation maintains administrative control of disbursements, ensuring victims receive maximum compensation rather than minimum restitution after legal fees. Reynolds studied the document. Then Emily. Why are you doing this, Ms. Lancaster? Most people in your position would just walk away. Emily thought of the elderly couple who'd lost their home, the single mother working 3 jobs to replace her children's college fund, Michael's sister who'd taken her own life. Because I can, she said simply. Because someone should. After the meeting, Emily and Michael stood on the plaza outside the building. Autumn wind whipping Emily's hair across her face. Think they'll agree? Michael asked. They'd be fools not to, Emily replied. They get the win without doing the work. Michael studied her curiously. You didn't mention your visit with Daniel. Emily tensed. It wasn't relevant, wasn't it? You found the accounts after seeing him. I found the notebook before seeing him, she corrected. The visit just confirmed some things. Like what? Emily stared across the plaza, watching office workers hurry past. That he's capable of remorse. That he was planning to return the money eventually. She met Michael's skeptical gaze. I'm not defending him. What he did was unforgivable. But he's not a monster, just a broken man who made terrible choices. You still have feelings for him, Michael observed, his voice carefully neutral. I have feelings about him, Emily clarified. Anger, confusion, grief, for what I thought we had. She shook her head. But mostly I just want to fix what he broke, including myself. As they parted ways, Emily checked her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother? one from the foundation's new executive director, and a text from a number she now recognized as belonging to Daniel's lawyer. He's asking for you again. Important information about additional accounts. Emily hesitated, thumb hovering over the message. Then she typed a simple reply. Tell him, I'll visit tomorrow. Some questions still needed answers, and some wounds, she was beginning to understand, could only heal through confronting their source. The courthouse steps teemed with reporters, their cameras trained on the entrance like hunters waiting for prey. Emily slipped in through a side door, guided by Catherine Walsh's steady hand on her elbow. Remember, Catherine murmured, short, factual answers. No editorializing, no emotions. Emily nodded, smoothing her charcoal gray suit jacket. 5 months had passed since her wedding day. 5 months of rebuilding her life piece by painful piece. Now she would face Daniel in court for the first time since their jail visit, not as his wife, but as a witness for the prosecution. The courtroom hushed as she entered. She kept her eyes forward, avoiding the defense table where she knew Daniel waited. Judge Harriman, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, nodded as Emily took the stand. Please state your name for the record. Emily Lancaster. Not Prescott, not Mercer. The defense attorney clarified immediately. Objection, the prosecutor called, badgering the witness. Sustained. Judge Harriman said sharply. Ms. Lancaster, please raise your right hand. After swearing in, the prosecutor approached. Reynolds had warmed to Emily considerably since their meeting, especially after the Victim Compensation Fund received national praise. Ms. Lancaster, could you tell the court how you met the defendant? Emily described their first meeting at the museum fundraiser, their courtship, his proposal, all under the name Jonathan Prescott, all built on lies. At any point during your relationship, did you suspect the defendant was not who he claimed to be? No, Emily said firmly. His deception was complete. And how did you discover his true identity? At our wedding reception, a man named Michael Foster stood up and revealed that Jonathan was actually Daniel Mercer, wanted for investment fraud. What was your reaction? Emily's eyes finally shifted to Daniel. He sat perfectly still, gaze steady on her face. Disbelief. Then devastation. Did the defendant ever admit his true identity to you? Yes, after Mr. Forster's revelation. And did he express remorse for deceiving you? Emily hesitated. He expressed regret that I had discovered the truth. On cross-examination, the defense attorney approached with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Lancaster, during your relationship with my client, was he ever violent or abusive? Toward you? No. Was he a supportive partner? Yes, but a simple yes is sufficient, the attorney interrupted smoothly. During your time together, did my client engage in any criminal activities that you witnessed? Not that I was aware of. In fact, he was employed legitimately at Hamilton Investment Group, correct? Rising through the ranks based on his performance. Yes. And he made charitable donations. Volunteered with community organizations. Yes, thank you, Ms. Lancaster. The redirect from Reynolds was brief. Ms. Lancaster, you've since discovered that the defendant maintained hidden offshore accounts containing millions in stolen funds. Correct? Yes. And you've worked to locate those funds and return them to his victims. Yes. Why did you take on that responsibility? Emily met Daniel's eyes directly. Because someone needed to repair the damage he'd done. After her testimony, Emily sat in the gallery, listening as Michael Foster described his sister's suicide, as elderly Thomas Wilson explained how he now lived in his daughter's basement, his retirement dreams shattered. As Cecilia Morales detailed working 3 jobs to replace her children's stolen college funds. Daniel's face remained impassive throughout, but Emily noticed his hands clenched tightly beneath the table. The prosecution's final witness was FBI Special Agent Talbot, who presented a meticulous financial trail documenting Daniel's crimes both old and new. The defendant continued to move funds between hidden accounts as recently as 1 month before his arrest, Talbot explained, actively managing his stolen assets while presenting himself as a legitimate investment advisor. When court adjourned for the day, Emily slipped out quickly, avoiding reporters. Outside, Catherine waited with her car. You did well, her attorney said. Emily watched the courthouse recede in the side mirror. It didn't feel good. It's not supposed to, but it's necessary. What happens tomorrow? The defense begins their case. They'll try to show he's reformed, that he deserves leniency. Emily turned away, watching the city blur past her window. Does he? Emily hadn't planned to return to the courthouse, but curiosity pulled her back like a gravitational force. She slipped into the gallery as Daniel took the stand, his orange jumpsuit replaced with a subdued navy suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. His testimony began predictably a difficult childhood, early mistakes snowballing into larger crimes, fear of capture driving him deeper into deception. Emily had heard versions of this story before, in their conversations and in the letters she still hadn't read. Then the defense attorney changed direction. Mr. Mercer, what can you tell us about your charitable contributions over the past 3 years? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I made regular donations to several organizations. Could you be more specific? Children's hospitals, literacy programs, Homeless shelters. The attorney presented documentation, bank records, thank you letters, certificates of appreciation made out to Jonathan Prescott. Approximately how much did you donate during this period? Daniel hesitated. Around $600,000. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Emily leaned forward, frowning. And where did this money come from? My legitimate earnings. At Hamilton Investments. And, double quotes. Daniel paused. Some from the offshore accounts. The attorney nodded. So you were using the stolen funds to help others? Objection, Reynolds called. Characterization. Sustained. The defense attorney adjusted. Mr. Mercer, did you make these donations for public recognition? No, most were anonymous. Why? Daniel's eyes briefly found Emily's in the gallery. Because I was trying to make amends, in my own way. I knew I couldn't undo the damage I'd caused, but I thought I could at least try to do some good. The questioning continued, revealing more surprising details. Regular volunteer work at a literacy center, mentoring at-risk youth, monthly transfers, to a women's shelter in Boston, the same city where he'd run his original scam. Then came the bombshell. Mr. Mercer, did you ever directly assist any of your former victims? Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. One family. Please explain to the court. The Rodriguez family. Alberto Rodriguez invested his family's savings with me. When I disappeared with the money, he lost everything. His daughter Lucia had been accepted to medical school. Emily watched Daniel's face tighten with emotion. 3 years ago, I found out Lucia was working as a waitress, trying to save enough to return to school. I anonymously paid for her tuition, all of it. She graduates next spring. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harriman called for order. And did you do this for recognition, Mr. Mercer, to ease your conscience? I did it because it was right, Daniel said simply. I didn't want my mistakes to destroy her future. On cross-examination, Reynolds was merciless. These charitable acts, they began after you met Emily Lancaster, correct? Yes. So for 5 years after your initial crimes, you did nothing to help your victims? That's correct. And these donations, impressive as they sound, represent what percentage of the total funds you stole? Daniel's jaw tightened. Less than 10%. Less than 10%, Reynolds repeated for the jury's benefit. While you lived comfortably under a stolen identity, Reynolds produced more bank records. You purchased a luxury vehicle last year, correct? And a vacation property in Michigan. Yes, hardly the actions of a truly repentant man. As Daniel stepped down, his eyes sought Emily's again. She held his gaze for a long moment before looking away. Outside the courtroom, a reporter caught up. To her, Ms. Lancaster. How do you feel about the revelation that your husband was secretly helping his victims? Emily stepped around him. No comment. Do you believe he's truly changed? She paused, considering. I believe people can change, she said carefully, but they can't erase their past. As she pushed through the crowd, her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Did you know about the Rodriguez girl? No, she typed back. Did you? Just found out? Verified with Rodriguez family? It's true. Emily sat in her car, engine idling, thoughts tumbling like clothes in a dryer. The Daniel she'd fallen in love with, the kind, thoughtful man who read to children at the library, and remembered how she took her coffee hadn't been entirely fictional after all. The revelation didn't erase his crimes, didn't justify the lies, but it complicated the simple narrative she'd constructed to help herself heal. The man she'd loved was neither wholly real nor wholly invented. He existed somewhere in the complicated space between truth and deception, redemption and manipulation, like the marriage that never legally existed, yet had felt more real than anything in her life. The jury took 3 days to deliberate. Emily spent them in a state of suspended animation, unable to focus on work, on the foundation, on anything but the impending verdict. She'd stopped pretending she didn't care about the outcome. When her phone finally rang with news that the jury had reached a decision, she was in her office at the newly established Mercer Victim Compensation Fund. Michael's idea to name it after Daniel had initially appalled her, but she'd gradually accepted the logic it ensured the media kept covering their work, which brought more donations and helped more victims. Are you going? Michael asked when she told him about the verdict. Yes. Want company? Emily hesitated. No, this is something I need to do alone. The courtroom was packed as she slipped into a seat in the back row. Daniel stood at the defense table, shoulders squared. As the jury filed in, Judge Harriman addressed the defendant. Mr. Mercer, please rise for the verdict. The jury foreman, a retired school teacher with kind eyes, read from a slip of paper. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The litany continued through all 12 counts. Daniel's expression never changed, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. Judge Harriman thanked the jury, then addressed Daniel directly. Mr. Mercer, you will return for sentencing in 2 weeks. Until then, you are remanded to custody. As the courtroom began to empty, Daniel turned. His eyes found Emily immediately, as if he'd known exactly where she was sitting all along. She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding once, not forgiveness. but acknowledgement. 2 weeks later, she returned for the sentencing. This time, she sat in the front row. She noticed Daniel had lost more weight, the suit hanging even looser on his frame. Judge Harriman allowed statements from several victims. Thomas Wilson described working at a grocery store at age 76. Cecilia Morales detailed her children's diminished opportunities. Michael Foster spoke of his sister's empty chair at family gatherings. Then, surprisingly, Lucia Rodriguez approached the podium. The young medical student spoke eloquently about discovering her anonymous benefactor's identity through the trial. "What Mr. Mercer did to my family was unforgivable," she said clearly. "But his attempt to make amends gave me back my future." People are complex. His crimes and his redemptive acts both deserve recognition. When Daniel was invited to speak, he stood slowly, hands trembling slightly as he unfolded a piece of paper. "I've written and rewritten this statement dozens of times," he began. "Nothing I say can undo the damage I've caused. Nothing can bring back Jennifer Foster or restore the years of security I stole from so many families." He set the paper aside, continuing without notes. "I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I ask only that the court consider that people can change, not enough to erase their crimes, but enough to stop perpetuating them, enough to begin the work of making amends." His eyes briefly met Emily's. "I've hurt people who trusted me, people who loved me. That knowledge will be my true punishment, regardless of your sentence." Judge Harriman studied him for a long moment before delivering her decision. "Mr. Mercer, your crimes were calculated, extensive, and caused irrevocable harm to dozens of victims. However, I also recognize your recent efforts toward restitution, and the unusual circumstances of your case." She adjusted her glasses. "I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 4 years. Additionally, you will make full restitution to all victims, as determined by the court." As guards led Daniel away, he paused, looking back at Emily. His lips formed words she couldn't hear across the courtroom, but she could read them clearly enough. "I'm sorry." Outside, reporters swarmed her. "Emily, how do you feel about the sentence? Do you think justice was served? Will you wait for him?" She pushed through them without answering, finding her car in the parking garage. Inside its quiet sanctuary, she finally allowed herself to cry, not for the man being taken to prison, but for the woman who had loved a ghost and was now left with only complicated memories. Emily adjusted her visitor's badge, the plastic lanyard uncomfortable against her neck. Federal Correctional Institution, Sandstone, was a 5-hour drive from Chicago, a journey she now made every 2 months. Her quarterly pilgrimage, as Sophia teasingly called it. The visiting room was bright and impersonal beige walls, uncomfortable plastic chairs, vending machines humming in the corner. Emily selected her usual spot, near the window where natural light softened the institutional harshness. Daniel appeared in the doorway, scanning the room until he found her. 2 years of incarceration had changed him. Physically, he'd lost the polished veneer of Jonathan Prescott, investment advisor. His hair was cropped short, his face leaner, his hands calloused from work detail. But his eyes remained the same, intelligent, alert, with that intensity that had first drawn her to him. "You cut your hair," he observed as he sat across from her, nodding at her new shoulder-length bob. 3 months ago," Emily replied. "You're behind on your Emily updates." A small smile played at his lips. The newsletter must have gotten lost in the mail. Their initial awkwardness had gradually evolved into this careful banter, not quite friendship, not quite anything else recognizable. Emily still didn't know exactly why she kept visiting. Closure, perhaps, or maybe just to remind herself that he was real, that she hadn't imagined the good parts along with the lies. "How's the foundation?" Daniel asked, leaning back in his chair. "Growing. We've hired 2 more caseworkers. The Rodriguez model is working." The Rodriguez model, named after Lucia Rodriguez, the medical student Daniel had secretly helped provided educational grants to victims' family members. It had become the cornerstone of the foundation's work, transforming Daniel's most genuine attempt at redemption into a sustainable program. "Michael's still involved." Emily nodded. "He's on the board now. Still suspicious of you, but he's channeled it productively." "And you?" Daniel asked, his voice softening. "How are you, really?" Emily considered the question. 2 years ago, she might have deflected or offered a polite platitude. Now she found herself answering honestly. "I'm good, better than I expected to be. The foundation gives me purpose. I'm dating sometimes, nothing serious." A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed Daniel's face before he masked it. "I'm glad. Your parole hearing is coming up," she said, changing the subject. "Your lawyer thinks the foundation's success will help your case. Maybe?" Daniel shrugged. "I'm not counting on anything. The financial literacy program you started here, that should count in your favor too." Daniel had established a program, teaching fellow inmates basic financial management, helping them prepare for eventual release. The warden had written a letter of support for his parole application. "People deserve second chances," Emily added quietly. "Some people," Daniel corrected, "not everyone. You've changed. Prison changes everyone, not always for the better." "I meant before prison. You were already changing." "The donations," Lucia Rodriguez The anonymous payments to your victims. Daniel looked down at his hands. Too little, too late. But not nothing, Emily insisted. That's why I keep coming back. I think because the man I fell in love with wasn't entirely fictional. Parts of him were real. The best parts. Daniel met her eyes. I never lied about loving you, I know, Emily said softly. I've read your letters. His eyebrows rose in surprise. All of them. She nodded. It took me a year to open the first one. Then I read them all in one night. 43 letters. Hundreds of pages chronicling his regrets, his childhood, his gradual moral awakening. The complete truth he'd never been brave enough to tell her in person. Why didn't you say anything before now? I needed time to process them, to decide what they meant. To me? And what did you decide? His voice was carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his intensity. Emily smiled sadly. That I'll never know what might have been if you'd been honest from the beginning. That some questions don't have answers. A guard announced that visiting hours were ending. They stood awkwardly. The familiar moment of not knowing how to say goodbye. Will you come for the parole hearing? Daniel asked. Emily hesitated. Do you want me to? Yes, he said simply, but only if you want to. As she drove back to Chicago that evening, Emily thought about the strange path her life had taken. 2 years ago, she'd been a heartbroken bride, humiliated and lost. Now she ran a foundation helping dozens of families rebuild their lives. And somehow, against all logic, she still visited the man who had shattered her world, and then, inadvertently, helped her build something stronger from the fragments. The parole board's decision arrived on a Tuesday, nearly 4 years to the day since Emily's wedding. She received the news via a terse email from Daniel's lawyer. Parole granted, release scheduled for June 15th. Emily sat at her desk at the foundation's office, staring at the message. 1 month, in 1 month, Daniel Mercer would walk free. Good news? Michael asked, pausing in her doorway. Emily showed him the email. Michael's expression remained neutral. How do you feel about it? I don't know, she admitted. Relieved, I think, for him, and nervous. Nervous that he'll go back to his old ways. Emily shook her head, nervous about what happens next. For 4 years, our relationship has been defined by prison walls and visiting hours. What happens when those boundaries disappear? Michael studied her carefully. You don't owe him anything. You know, I know, Emily said, but that's not why I kept visiting. On June 15th, Emily waited outside the prison gates, hands fidgeting with her car keys. When Daniel finally emerged, carrying a small duffel bag containing 4 years of prison possessions, he stopped short at the sight of her. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. Neither was I, Emily admitted. The drive back to Chicago passed an awkward conversation, his plans for housing a halfway house initially, employment and offer from a prison reform nonprofit, reconnecting with the world one step at a time. Foundation has an opening, Emily said abruptly as they neared the city. Financial counselor for victims? The board approved it last week. Daniel looked at her sharply. Are you offering me a job? It would be complicated. There would be conditions. Supervision, full transparency. Working with the people I hurt, Daniel said slowly. Helping them rebuild, Emily corrected, like you did with Lucia Rodriguez. Why would you trust me with this? Emily kept her eyes on the road. Because you understand better than anyone how financial predators think, how to protect vulnerable people, and the real reason. She glanced at him briefly. Because redemption isn't a single act. It's a lifelong commitment. I think you've earned the chance to try. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood nervously before the Foundation's board of directors, presenting his proposal for a financial literacy program specifically designed for fraud victims. Emily watched from the back of the room as Michael questioned him rigorously, challenging his methods and motivations. And why should we believe you've changed? Michael asked finally, the question everyone had been avoiding. Daniel was silent for a moment. You shouldn't, he said finally, not based on words. Judge me by my actions going forward. That's all, I ask. After the meeting, Emily found Daniel alone in the conference room, gathering his materials. You did well, she said. They're going to approve the program, even Michael, especially Michael. He respects your honesty. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Emily's chest ache. I'm still not sure this is the right path. Working here, seeing you every day. Too difficult, Emily asked softly. Too easy to pretend things could be normal between us, he corrected. Too easy to hope for something I don't deserve. Emily leaned against the doorframe considering him. The man before her was neither Jonathan Prescott, the perfect fiancé, nor Daniel Mercer, the ruthless Conman. He was someone new shaped by consequences, remorse, and the difficult work of redemption. I don't know what normal looks like for us, she admitted. I don't know if we can build anything on such a broken foundation, but I do know that you're not the same person who crashed into my life 4 years ago. Neither are you, Daniel observed. You're stronger now, clearer about who you are. We both are. Outside the window, Chicago stretched before them, the late afternoon sun gilding skyscrapers in gold. So much had changed since that wedding day when a stranger had stood up and shattered her world. I have something for you, Emily said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, worn notebook, Daniel's black book of accounts that had led her to the hidden millions. You don't need this anymore, but I thought you might want it. As a reminder, Daniel took it carefully, thumbing through pages now empty of secrets. A reminder of what I was, and what you're choosing not to be, Emily added, as they stood together in the fading light. Neither naive about the difficulty of the path ahead, nor cynical about the possibility of genuine change. Emily felt something settle within her. Forgiveness exactly, but acceptance? The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define the future. Truth, she had learned, was rarely simple and never perfect. It lived in the complicated spaces between what we show the world and who we truly are, between the mistakes we make and our efforts to redeem them. Daniel Mercer had entered her life as a lie, but in exposing that lie, he had inadvertently led her to a deeper truth about herself, her resilience, her capacity for compassion, and her belief that even the most broken stories might find, if not a happy ending, at least a meaningful one. And that, perhaps, was the most honest truth of all.